Hello and welcome to the Books on Asia podcast, sponsored by Stonebridge Press, publisher of fine books on Asia for over 30 years, located at www.stonebridge.com. And I'm your host, Amy Chavez. Today I'm speaking with translator Linda Terrell about her latest translation into English, The Legacy of the Ryukyu Kingdom, published in March by Japan Publishing Industry Foundation for Culture. Linda has an MA in Japanese Historical Linguistics from University of Hawaii. And today she's going to talk about the fascinating history of the islands we now call Okinawa. So, welcome, Lina.
Hello, Amy. Nice to meet you face to face.
And you too. And let me see, you are joining us from Texas, is that correct?
Yes, I live outside of Austin, Texas.
Okay, great. You have two books on Okinawa, or the Ryukyu Kingdom. One of those is called The Ryukyu Kingdom, Cornerstone of East Asia, and that was put out by University of Hawaii Press, right? And the just released one is The Legacy of the Ryukyu Kingdom, an Okinawan History by Takara Kuroyoshi. And Takara Kuroyoshi is a native of Okinawa, and he originally published this in Japanese, I guess, in 1993, a year after the 20th anniversary of Okinawa's revision to Japan in 1972, when it was effectively under U.S. rule. I do want to tell people just a really short history of the Ryukyu Kingdom. Your book, I believe, covers 1429, right, until Japan annexed Okinawa in 1879. So the capital was Shuri Castle. The kingdom traded with both China and Japan, and as we'll see later, international destinations as well. And they developed most of these international connections for trading across Asia via Naha. And they had a great age of trade. So let's delve right into it. My first question for you today is, I was really intrigued about how the kingdom had these Noro priestesses, these divine women. The king at the time, I believe, was King Shoshin. So could you tell us a little bit about this king and about the Noro priestesses?
Right. So probably many people who are interested in Japan and Japanese history have heard of a religious woman who lived in Kyushu, who was famously the religious person, and her brother was the military government authority person. Kimiku, I think she is known as. Pimiku, that's it, Pimiku. Sorry, it's coming back. And so we see this duality between men with like the earthly power and the women with the heavenly power, the contact with the gods and the spiritual world. One of the things that really highlights the fact that the people who live in the Ryukyuan Islands and the people who live in the Japanese islands share common roots is this similarity. This is the way historians have played it. Although there's no saying that the people in Okinawa are related to those people in Kyushu, just they had similar ideas about women's connection with the spiritual. Yes. So all along, I think women were the ones who oversaw the home and the hearth and the shrine at home. They took care of it. They made sure there was food there, as always, women making sure that the spirits are fed, just like the children are. While the men are out there running the village and becoming the local lords known as Anji eventually, and eventually the king and his sisters or his daughters or his wives or his mother would be the head priestess of the national religion, which of course later under the Ryukyuan kings became more formalized, and the king was really in charge, but the women still held this. They were the ones who were in charge of the spiritual side of things and seeing to the king's well-being in their conversations with the gods.
And they presided over all the rituals, right?
That's right. So there's a collection of texts which aren't really mentioned in this book that I translated, but anybody who's familiar with Okinawan history may have heard of Omuro Soshi. And it's usually the priestess's voice calling on the gods and asking for a favor for the ships and for the harvest and for the well-being of the king. And there is a king or two who is actually named in those songs.
That sounds fantastic. Now I want to read your first book already.
Yeah, so Okinawa, if you go there, you'll know that they have the places that are where they built their gusuku, which were either the fortified castles where the various lords had their base. It was either because they were able to be fortified or there was some kind of spring there, or there was some kind of sense, in Japanese, if you go to some of these shrines, they'll have like a tree with a special spirit, has a white paper ribbon around it, right? Like has a kami living there. The same kind of thing in Japan, in Okinawa, where this place had a special spirit, so it became important religious place. But the most important place in Okinawa, it's like the easternmost point of Okinawa Island, and there's an island outside of it that you can see through this opening in it's not a cave, it's like a limestone structure. Like you walk through it and there's an opening with a view out to the sea. And I can imagine the sunrise coming up there, the sunlight would be completely focused on whoever's standing in that opening. And that was where they could gain great power in the light of this rising sun. Seifa Utaki is mentioned many times in the Omuro Soshi, and it was a place of great religious importance for the Ryukyuans.
It's a World Heritage Site now, so
yes,
it's big. Now it's a big tourist place. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then later, the Ryukyu started trading with Japan, but they actually started trading with Satsuma first, right? The Satsumo domain.
There was always some contact between the people in what came to be known as the Ryukyuan Islands. It wasn't Okinawa until much later. But they're actually first mentioned by Chinese texts, and they find archaeological findings of money from the 5th century China in Okinawan digs, which would be before any contact with Japan. It was the Mongols were up in the north, the Yuan dynasty in northern China, and southern Song was going to have like a renaissance and started reaching out. And that's when we really see things starting to happen between China and Ryukyu. Back and forth, and Okinawans were going to China to study and become scholars and so on. And when the Yuan fell and Ming came in, then China was trying to get a hold on, it was a terrible pirate situation. There was a lot of renegade people out on sail ships. But the Ming dynasty wanted to protect itself from the raids, the coastal raids. So that's when they developed their relationship with the Ryukyu kingdom.
And that was the tribute system, is that right?
The tribute system, right. And Okinawa joined the tribute system in the 14th century, around in there. And that's when also the kingdom became established. Now, Japan was mixed up in all this because Japan also kind of halfway joined the tributary system, but they only had the right to send a tribute mission like once every 25 years, whereas Okinawa at one point was sending 2 every year. So even though Japan was always in the background for a very long time, the main relationship was with China, and as a member of the Chinese diaspora and one of the Chinese, member communities. And right there lies the reason why Okinawan culture has a special flavor of like the Chineseness, the not Japanese part of Okinawan history. A lot of it comes from those years when Okinawa, in effect, became the trading masters of China.
So one of the reasons that Chinese closed its ports, that Chinese people couldn't leave, from what I understand, is that also they were worried that they might join the pirates, right?
That's right.
So this is the way to keep everyone pure.
And that tells us that some of those pirates were Chinese. They absolutely, and we know they were. Such an interesting story. It's how Ryukyu was the Amazon of its era, the Amazon company. I'm talking about
right.
Buying and selling and delivering and picking up.
Yeah. Okay. And so this would also explain why there's so much Chinese culture around Naha, because Naha was the international trading port. Is that right?
That's right. So the whole hub of their huge circuit that stretched from Okinawa, you go north, Japan, Korea, and that Ningbo, between Taiwan and the mainland, there's a couple ports in there that they would visit. They would visit what is now Guangzhou, the Hong Kong area, and then on to Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Jakarta, far-flung areas. The entire culture of the Ryukyuan kingdom was often built around accommodating this work and trade.
Interestingly, because Japan, after it entered the Edo period, a period of seclusion, the Satsuma were trading with the Ryukyus, right?
Yes.
And that way they were getting all these international goods that other people in Japan didn't have any access to. And they made tons of money on this deal, didn't they?
They certainly did. So the Ryukyuans actually got lucky because they formed their state and kingdom and became a client of China, while Japan was embroiled in the Warring States period and the unrest after the fall of the Heian, and all those samurai were fighting over who owned what and who was going to run the show. So up until 1550 or so, the Okinawans had kind of like they didn't have to worry about what Japan brought because Japan had no energy for anything outside of its borders. But then, of course, we all know that Edo was established by Tokugawa. They started being able to look outward. The samurai in Satsuma, it's like, oh, there's a nice juicy little plum for us and we can make some money and be wealthy. And they invaded Ryukyu with no resistance. They had spent 50 years like making unreasonable demands. You have to help us build this castle. You have to help us invade Korea. You have to do this. And Ryukyu was like, no. They were getting squeezed pretty hard. Satsuma just said, eh. And they sent, 1,000 samurai came in and took over. Okinawa had no military ability.
The book touches just briefly on the fact that Naha was an important slave market.
Okay, so those pirates, they would kidnap people. They would grab people for sale, notoriously women and girls. So the women ended up in Naha, and the Ryukyuan kings would often return the women to Korea. There's a story in the book about a group of Koreans who returned to Korea, and that was a way to start a relationship with the Korean king at the time. And very often, some of those women ended up marrying Ryukyuans, and they were, in a census later, you saw these same names appearing as being married with Ryukyuan men. So.
And what brought on the collapse of the Ryukyu kingdom in 1879?
So, we're all familiar with the Japanese story of the Meiji Restoration and the return of the emperor to the seat of power and the head of government in Japan. And they went on for about 10 years where they were trying to figure out where the Ryukyu kingdom fit into that system. Was the Ryukyu kingdom going to be an independent nation outside of Japan? Or were they going to take it from, Satsuma had been running Ryukyu anyway for 250 years. So they decided, okay, you're just Japan now. You're going to be Okinawa prefecture. But those islands that Satsuma was administering directly aren't even part of Okinawa anymore. That's part of, the Kyushu southern tip below Kagoshima.
Okay, so getting to translating the book, can you talk about a couple of the particular challenges?
Okay, so I'm going to say that we were in a hurry. So sometimes there's messages between the lines that I just can't see, right? As always. And that's where Adam Jimenez and the other editors came in, and they were brilliant. They worked so hard. And sometimes there was a longer note than there was the text on the page. Okay, I think it means this. And we would talk back and forth and say, and then, is this okay? How does this work?
That's a really good way to translate, though, is to have a lot of feedback going back and forth, because then you're more likely to get it right.
That's right. And we were all of us more interested in getting it right than being right? So,
and you're all Japanese speakers as well, and working in the industry.
Yeah, there was at least two women one was very knowledgeable about Okinawa, and she was going through and reading it and spoke English very, very well, but as a non-native speaker, I was the one doing the English. And they were making sure I stayed on track with the English. We got very close to what the original text was trying to convey.
Yeah, well, it reads brilliantly. So
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. Okay, so we are running out of time, but the last question I always ask the authors who come on the Books on Asia podcast is what their favorite 3 books on Japan are, because I think that people like to hear what authors are reading and what they like. And I know I do. So
Alan Booth wrote a book about his walk from the northern tip of Hokkaido to the southern tip of Kyushu, the roads to Sata. That book, just magic.
Yeah.
And such an insight into parts of Japan that most people never see, right?
Right.
I loved that book. And I don't have 3 books. I only have one other book. And this is a book that dates back to my college days. And it's Ivan Morris's The World of the Shining Prince, because my introduction to Japan was a literature class I took as a freshman in college. It was Japanese literature in English, and we read The Tale of Genji. And so this book, I reread it every few years just to get back.
Yeah.
The wonder of that class and the discovery of a part of the world I knew nothing about. And it was that class that made me decide that, East Asian studies is what I'm going to do. And I went on to study Chinese, and now I translate books from Japanese to English.
It's all because of that book?
That class. But I love this Ivan Morris's reading of Terrell. He was the translator, I think, of one of the versions.
Yeah, there are several versions. And you are not the first person to say that. That Tale of Genji has influenced so many people to start up,
right,
Asian studies.
Such an extraordinary book as well. And the fact that it was authored by a woman. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like they talk about representation matters so much. But when you hear that the first known novel in the world was written by a woman in Heian, Japan, you sit there and go, you go, girl. I have to read that book.
And everyone should. It's great.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And there are lots of other great authors during her time as well. Sei Shonagon, right? Sei Shonagon. And then Shikibu. So Tale of Genji was Murasaki Shikibu, and then the other Shikibu who wrote poetry. And yeah.
Yes, I mean, that whole period is known for its just absolutely fabulous poetry and then novels and these stories because of the court culture that treasured both the skills and the output of these people.
Yeah.
As a Japanese historical linguistics major, we spent a whole bunch of time reading a whole bunch of tanka from the year 950. Fantastic stuff.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Lina Terrell.
Well, thank you so much, Amy. It was a pleasure to meet you. I was a fan of your writing when I lived in Japan.
Thank you so much.
In the Japan Times were wonderful.
23 years. It was a good time. So don't forget to pick up Lina Terrell's translation of The Legacy of the Ryukyu Kingdom, an Okinawan History. And it's available on online stores or anywhere you buy your Japanese books. You've been listening to the Books on Asia podcast, produced and edited by Amy Chavez and Michael Palmer, logo by Alex Kerr, sponsored by Stonebridge Press, publisher of fine books on Asia for over 30 years. They can be found at www.stonebridge.com. And I'm your podcast host, Amy Chavez, author of Amy's Guide to Best Behavior in Japan and The Widow, the Priest, and the Octopus Hunter, discovering a lost way of life on a secluded Japanese island. For more interviews, book reviews, and other features, visit the Books on Asia website at booksonasia.net.